Rinpoche came here today, as asked to come for the teachings here today, and we welcomed Rinpoche outside when Rinpoche arrived, so Rinpoche would like to thank you for welcoming him. So Rinpoche is saying that now here's all of you, like nuns, ordained monks, nuns, and so forth, have prostrated towards Geshe-la today. So Rinpoche feels embarrassed because he is no longer a monk. So Rinpoche feels it's embarrassing that people prostrate towards him. Rinpoche says, I have to prostrate towards you. So Rinpoche has been asked to teach the text the three principal aspects of the path. So the three principal aspects being renunciation, bodhichitta, and the correct view. And so Rinpoche is talking about this kind of not from his own experience, but rather like just wants to talk about this, just to share this with you as he has been asked. So Rinpoche will talk about this the way it's been asked. So Rinpoche is saying that he's received many commentaries, many teachings on this particular text. So, for instance, by Kapche Pabonka Rinpoche when Rinpoche was younger, and by many other lamas, Rinpoche received teachings from them. But again, Rinpoche says that it's not because of his own experience, but rather because of he having received all these different teachings, so he would like to share what he's learned. So with regard to the first verse here, plus the homage, so Rinpoche basically went through this. He said, I bow to the most venerable lamas, to the best of my ability I shall explain the essential point of all the teachings of the conqueror, the path praised by the conqueror's sublime children, the entrance for the fortunate ones, aspiring for liberation. So basically Rinpoche said he received teachings on this before also in Dharamsala on this, so that these words, they basically show the great activity of the Lama, the great his great kind of actions, and how these actions are being put forth. So in that sense, there are these different aspects of the action of the Lama, which just they're indicated in this particular verse. So the first line, this line of homage, you bow to the most venerable lamas. So this is Lama Tsongkhapa himself bowing to the lamas that he received teachings from. So basically, Lama Tsongkhapa pays homage to, that is, bows to the lineage of the different lamas. He bows down to the kind of main lineage lamas, and so in that sense, in order to those lamas who have benefited him or who are beneficial, so in that sense, Rinpoche said that's why he bows down to those lamas. So with regard to Lama Tsongkhapa, he is actually explained to be a manifestation or an emanation of the Buddha of wisdom of Manjushri himself. But so, and then Rinpoche gave this kind of quote where it's basically saying that his activities are like that of a Buddha. So actually, that Lama Tsongkhapa engages in the enlightenment activities of the Buddha. But nonetheless, Lama Tsongkhapa, although being an emanation of Manjushri, he manifested in a very ordinary way, in a sense that he manifested as a normal person who engaged in the practices of listening, contemplation, and meditation. And then so in that way, therefore, pays homage, that is, bows to his own teachers, to the lamas who he received teachings from. So one of the main lamas, Lama Tsongkhapa's main teachers at the time, was the great Sakya Master Vrindava. So he was one of his main teachings, and Lama Tsongkhapa received mainly teachings from this Lama, from Lama Vrindava, on Madhyamika, on Pramanavartika, and so forth. So this is what Rinpoche remembers in terms of this being one of the main teachers of Lama Tsongkhapa. But it's also said that Lama Tsongkhapa's main teacher was the Buddha of wisdom, that is Manjushri himself. So that with regard to this particular text, also Lama Tsongkhapa was in an exchange, engaged in an exchange, in a kind of dialogue and a discussion with this Buddha of wisdom, that is with Manjushri. So actually Lama Tsongkhapa was born in Amdo, in the Tibetan area of Amdo. So Rinpoche is saying he's not sure when he was talking to Manjushri whether they're actually talking in the Amdo dialect or did they use what kind of dialect. So it's just something that kind of comes up as like an ancillary kind of topic, basically, whether they spoke with this dialect or whether Manjushri had used a different kind of language. So Rinpoche says that, well, anyway, so he was just joking with you about this. So the point is here, Lama Tsongkhapa bows down to the most venerable Lama. So here the Tibetan word, the word is Jetsun, as in like venerable here, it's Jetsun. So it consists of two syllables. The first one is Je. So that means someone who's not attached to the happiness of this lifetime, but is mainly concerned with next lifetimes. And then Zun kind of means, as usually translated as like disciplined, or Rinpoche explained that here it means kind of like someone who acts according to the teachings of the Buddha, according to the advice by the Buddha. And then Rinpoche said, if we disagree, we should say so. If we don't agree to that, we should say so. Actually, the word jitsun, as in like venerable here, this indicates it's a male, that indicates the male form, and then there's the female form, which would be jitsuma. So jitsun is for a man, jitsuma is for a woman. So there are many jitsumas here, Rinpoche says. So actually, Jitsun Ma is for a woman. So Jitsun Ba would imply like it's a man, but also Jitsun works for like, yeah, could also be used for So with regard to the word Lama, here the word Lama basically implies that the person who is such a Lama has greater qualities, has good qualities or greater qualities. So Rinpoche is saying, well, this is really like for a qualified Lama. This here means a qualified Lama. So Rinpoche says himself, I'm not a qualified Lama. So as it is described as in, like, in the scriptures, I think Rinpoche said something like it's like more like a deer-like, but not like an actual Lama. I think that's what Rinpoche said. So basically here the verses, the first line in Tibetan is actually the essential points of all the teachings of the conqueror. So to the best of my ability, I shall explain them later. So the first line, so Rinpoche explained the meaning of the word conqueror. So a conqueror here in the sense that a person who's conquered, a person who's overcome cognitive, that is afflictive obscurations as well as cognitive obscurations. So obscurations to liberation, obscurations to enlightenment. So implied by that, Rinpoche says that a Buddha is a conqueror, but was not a conqueror right from the beginning. He was not always enlightened, but rather was like us, an ordinary person, who then engaged in the practice of the path, and then eventually became a Buddha, eventually became a conqueror. So this is what Rinpoche understands this to mean here, this line, the essential points of all the teachings of the conqueror, with regard to the meaning of the word conqueror. So then with regard to the other words of this particular line, so the essential points of all the teachings. Here the teachings refers to the teachings of the Buddha, so the teachings of the Converse, the teachings of the Buddha. And there are three types, or three ways in which the teachings of the Buddha can be divided. So one way is, one type of teachings is the teachings that come from the mouth of the Buddha, or the actually coming from the Buddha himself. And then the next one are the blessed, the blessed kind of teachings, and then the teachings that are in terms of permission, how you receive permission to give those teachings. So there are those three types, and Rinpoche explained in terms of the difference between them. Well, the first one coming from the mouth of the Buddha, those are the teachings that are actually coming from the Buddha himself, that the words the Buddha himself spoke. And then the second one, the blessed kind of teachings, are the ones, for instance, if you take the Heart Sutra, and you have this dialogue between Shariputra and Chenrezig, where this dialogue takes place. That dialogue took place as a teaching by the Buddha, but it's blessed, so these beings were blessed to give these teachings. So with regard to the teachings that were given as being, having received a permission to do so, those are the teachings, for instance, that explain the whole circumstances of the Heart Sutra. So saying, at one point I have heard, and so forth. So those words in English, and at the very end when it concludes by saying, I praise the Buddha, etc. So those words basically, they are part of the third category, not the blessed teachings, not teaching out of a blessing, but having the permission to actually explain the circumstance. So with regard to the essential points of all the teachings, so the essential points here are renunciation, bodhichitta, and the right view. So here with regard to renunciation, it is renunciation from samsara. So to have a wish to get out of samsara, having understood the faults, the shortcomings of samsara, and now having understood, and having also understood the advantages of liberation, and therefore developing the wish to be liberated from those. So that's one of the three aspects, which is one of the essential points here. And so then it reads in the text, which in English would be the third line, in Tibetan it's the second line, the path praised by the conquerors of blind children. So Rinpoche explained that this refers to bodhichitta, the mind of Buddha, the mind of enlightenment. And so then the line, the entrance for the fortunate ones aspiring for liberation, well, that refers to the correct view, in the sense it is the view that we need that we need to meditate on in order to attain liberation. So that would refer to the wisdom realizing emptiness, to the view realizing emptiness. And then the last line in Tibetan would be, all those to the best of my ability I shall explain. So this basically means that either to the best of his ability, as in like in the best way possible, or in terms of explaining very extensive, giving a very extensive explanation by way of very few words. So giving it extensive in terms of the meaning being extensive, but in terms of the words being brief. So the reason also why Lama Tsongkhapa says to the best of my ability, that also expresses, it indicates his great humility. So, but in other texts, of course, sometimes it does talk about the great qualities. So that Lama Tsongkhapa actually was such a great master. This is also expressed in some texts. And so Rinpoche said the reason for it sometimes being expressed in some texts, Rinpoche gave an example of, for instance, a doctor who's a very good, a very well-versed, kind of a very skillful doctor. When this doctor comes to a place where no one knows about him, then it's good that the doctor actually talks about his qualities, so because other people don't know his qualities or her qualities, and therefore it's helpful for them in that moment to hear about the qualities. So this is why sometimes those qualities are expressed. And so then it says, I shall explain. So those words, I shall explain, that's basically the promise to compose the text. And so this is considered to be vital, or this is considered to be beneficial in the sense that we make the promise to do so, so that there will be no obstacles, that the person will be able, the author will be able to complete the composure of this particular text. So in that sense, it's said to be beneficial to say that. And so then also with regard to the next part where you urge those to listen, so basically there are different types of vessels. We are like a vessel. So you have the explanation of 3 different types of vessels, that we shouldn't be a vessel like these, we shouldn't be any of those 3 types. The 3 types of vessel are those are like an upside down vessel, a vessel which is placed the other way around, so you can't put anything into it, a vessel that is dirty from within, and a vessel that has a hole in it. So Rinpoche explains like a vessel being upside down, that would be like having the attitude, well, I've listened to a lot of teachings, I've received a lot of teachings here, this is not something that concerns me, this is not something that is important, so not to be open enough to those teachings. And also with regard to the one with the hole, it's important that we retain the information, that we will not forget, so to remind ourselves again and again of what is being taught, so to not be like a vessel that has a hole, in the sense that whatever you put in kind of leaves the vessel again, or pours out again. So basically, Rinpoche explained, therefore, before, those who are not attached to the pleasures of psychic existence, who exert themselves to give meaning to this life of leisure and endowments, who entrust their mind in the path pleasing the Buddhas, fortunate ones listen with a clear mind. So that's urging those to listen to the teachings. And then Rinpoche read the next verse, which reads, without pure renunciation, there's no way to pacify the yearning for the pleasures and fruits of the ocean of psychic existence. Since longing for psychic existence thoroughly enchanged living beings, first seek renunciation. So then Rinpoche explained that, so this verse starts already with the first of those principal aspects, renunciation. So basically, the point is here that with regard to renunciation, we need to understand the shortcomings of psychic existence, in the sense that the marvels of psychic existence, those splendors that we perceive, that they have the disadvantages. So to not be attached to entertainment, to reputation and so forth, but to see actually their shortcomings, to see the shortcomings of these aspects of psychic existence, and be rather be concerned with the next life, to have more interest in our next lives. So in that sense, to be not swerved, or to not be influenced by the splendors of samsara, but instead to understand the general as well as the particular shortcomings, that is, disadvantages of psychic existence, and in that way generate what's called renunciation. So basically, it's important, therefore, to understand that wealth, pleasures, all the different aspects of samsara, anything that we experience in samsara, that we shouldn't be concerned with those, we shouldn't be attached to those, but rather generate a wish that overcomes those, that, or in other words, is not concerned with this lifetime, but is concerned with future lifetimes, and also in order then to generate, in order to be reborn also in a higher state, for instance, to then accumulate virtue and so forth. So Rinpoche then went back to verse number 2, so saying that, as explained before, so we shouldn't be attached to those marvels, etc., of psychic existence. And then also with regard to the third line here, so to entrust our mind in the path pleasing the Buddha, so pleasing the conqueror. So Rinpoche explains that here, with regard to the path that pleases the Buddha, this actually refers to the three principal aspects of the path. So that's wisdom, then bodhichitta, as well as renunciation. So this is what we should engage in. We should listen to this with a clear mind in order to please the conqueror. So then with regard to verse 3, well, Rinpoche explained that without pure renunciation, so without generating that mind of renunciation, we will not be able to overcome, that is, we will not be able to pacify our kind of attachment towards the pleasures and the fruits of the ocean of cyclic existence, of samsara. So therefore, it's important to overcome that kind of sense, that kind of wish or attachment towards cyclic existence, because otherwise we're enchained. We're enchained by this longing, by this attachment for cyclic existence, which is why, in order not to be enchained, we should generate renunciation. So Rinpoche says that he's read somewhere in the scripture, he's not really sure what scripture it was, but he remembers reading it somewhere that it's important with regard to this text, like basically any kind of text, like Lama Tsongkhapa's text, so this one here, so for instance, that when you receive this particular text here, or like the 100 deities of Dushita and so forth, like different texts, so at that time as it is described in the 100 deities of Dushita, you have the 7 limbs. So the 7 limbs, you should go according to the 7 limbs, for instance. So according to this particular text that describes the 7 limbs, of first doing prostrations, of making offerings, of confessing, rejoicing, and so forth. So you have all these different limbs, or these 7 limbs, basically. So to practice those first, by way of those 100 deities of Dushita, for instance, make requesting prayers, and after you've done that, only then you kind of read this text, that is, you study this text. So as a kind of a preparation, Rinpoche says he's read somewhere, he doesn't remember where, but in a text that is recommended to do those 7 limbs first before receiving God's teaching. And so then, basically, having done those 7 limbs, having gone through them, now you request to receive teachings on renunciation, for instance. So basically, you then engage in the practice of renunciation, that is, you receive those teachings on renunciation. So Rinpoche then basically explained verse number 4. So verse number 4, where it says that you familiarize your mind with the fact of leisure and endowment, so the different leisures, the different opportunities that you have, and to also understand that they are difficult to find and that there's no time to waste because death can come anytime. So to reflect upon the inevitability of death, that death can come anytime. You will die at some point, we don't know when we will die, and so forth. So in that way, to reflect upon death. And once you do that, by reflecting upon precious human rebirth as well as death, then attraction to this life will cease. So our attachment towards this lifetime will cease. But then with regard to the renunciation from the point of view of having renunciation for samsara itself, you should reflect upon the working of karma and its effect, as well as the different types of sufferings of samsara. So once you do that, not only do you overcome your attachment towards this lifetime, but also attachment towards samsara in itself. So with regard to, for instance, our human body, so we have this human body, we have this precious opportunity from the point of view of different freedoms, enjoying different freedoms, enjoying different opportunities, having these different opportunities, in the sense that this is very meaningful. So the first point with regard to this precious human rebirth, to understand that it's very meaningful and that it's difficult to generate or difficult to get. So in the sense that it's difficult or it's meaningful, we should think that from the point of view of the temporary benefit, it's very beneficial, it's very meaningful, but also from the point of view of long-term, that is ultimate benefit, it is extremely meaningful. This life is very meaningful. And likewise, it is difficult to get. It is hard to get such a life again. And there are these explanations from the point of view of the example, from the point of view of the cause, and so forth. So different explanations are given for why it is so meaningful, and in particular, why it is so hard to get such a life, to find such a life again. So from the point of view of this lifetime, this human birth being so difficult to get, so that is true from the point of view of the entity, from the point of view of nature, from the point of view of the causes that give rise to it, and from the point of view of examples. So here Rinpoche explained that with regard to the entity, although we have reached such a precious human rebirth, but having all the causes and conditions, or having all the qualities, the leisures and opportunities come together is so difficult. So this is actually very difficult from the point of view of just the entity of such a life. And then also from the point of view of the different causes and conditions that you need to generate in order to receive such a life. So accumulating merit, accumulating or making the right kind of prayers and so forth. So in that sense, it is very difficult, again, from the point of view of all these causes and conditions that you need to accumulate. And then thirdly, also from the point of view of many examples, so there are different examples given, and again, from that point of view, it is hard to have this kind of, to find such a human rebirth. So with regard to the meditation on death, so to reflect upon the meditation on death, that death certainly will come. We don't know when death will come, and that the only thing that benefits us is the Dharma itself. So from that point of view, not only should we think of precious human rebirth, but also of death, of the impermanence and death. Basically, the Buddha himself has also passed into parinirvana. The Buddha himself also passed away. So even the Buddha didn't stay around forever. And then in the same way, we should also think that we will die one day. To be aware that one day we will not live forever. So we oftentimes have the sense that I will go on, I will live on for a long time, but that is actually, there's no certainty with regard to death. And in that way, we should reflect upon our own death. And Rinpoche himself, he says, so this is something we should reflect upon again and again, Rinpoche says. And with regard to Rinpoche himself, he says, now I'm 96 years old. 96 years old, so basically, again, I shouldn't think of like having all this engaging in all these activities, these future activities, because if I do that, if I have a sense that I will continue to live on for a very long time, I will basically being concerned with these worldly activities and not actually prepare myself for my next life, and will go empty-handed. So therefore, it's very important to reflect upon one's own death. So at the time of Ling Rinpoche, and I hope I understood all this right, but what I understood was like at the time of Ling Rinpoche and Chichen Rinpoche, a Lama was invited from Kumbum, and Rinpoche was invited. So at that time a teaching was given, which is the mind training, like the rays of the sun. That teaching was given, and Rinpoche remembers kind of serving at that time the Lamas and receiving this teaching. And when you receive this teaching, remembers this one passage where it says there was a person who was about to die. The next day, they were about to die. But in the evening, so someone was aware of that, like the person was dying. But in the evening, the man was stitching the person was about to die, was stitching his shoes. So this person who was aware of the impending death of this man stitching his shoes was laughing about this, that he was spending this time stitching his shoes. So as it says in verse 4 here, with regard to verse 4, by repeatedly contemplating the infallibility of karma and its effect, so to reflect upon karma, the working of karma, in the sense that karma doesn't get wasted, that karma is certain, that it multiplies and so forth. So these different aspects of karma, you should reflect upon those. So now with regard to the certainty of karma, to understand that karma is certain in the sense that if you accumulate virtuous karma, then the result of that will be happiness. If you accumulate non-virtuous karma, the result of that will be suffering. So Geshe-la has a friend from Switzerland. He's passed away in the meantime, but he told Rinpoche had a friend from Switzerland who told him one day the reason for Rinpoche's voice being difficult, like having a problem with his voice, so that is the result of having scolded someone in a previous life. So that's what he said, and so Rinpoche remembers that this was what this person told Rinpoche. Then with regard to this samsaric life in general, so we are fortunate even if we're fortunate we're not reborn in the lower realms, but even if we're born as humans, if we're born as a human being, nonetheless there's so many different types of sufferings that we experience. So as humans we experience the suffering of birth, aging, sickness and death. And then likewise, even if we were reborn in one of the celestial realms, we may have a very long life, live for a long life, but eventually we'll have to die. So we lack freedom, we lack the freedom to continue to live on. And in that sense, there's again suffering, there's suffering. So no matter where we're reborn within samsara, we experience different types of suffering. Which is why not only should we overcome the attraction to the next lifetime, to the next life, but we should also overcome attraction to samsara in general. And then verse 5, she didn't read it but explained verse 5. So basically here with regard to having understood that having familiarized in ourselves, then any admiration for the splendors of samsara will not arise. So we will have no admiration, we have no attraction towards any splendor of samsara. And then if this kind of awareness, if this sense of samsara is there day and night, so continuously we have a sense of the shortcomings of samsara, well at that time then we have generated renunciation. And then verse 6, furthermore, that renunciation is not conjoined with pure bodhichitta. It will not become a cause of the sublime bliss of unsurpassed enlightenment. Therefore, the wise generate the supreme might of enlightenment. And again, Rinpoche explained that basically just that renunciation itself is not sufficient. Renunciation, we need to generate renunciation and conjoin it with the mind of enlightenment, that is the Mahayana mind, the generated mind, or the Mahayana mind of enlightenment. Because otherwise it will not become a cause for us to become Buddhas ourselves, which is why we need to cultivate bodhicitta.
Let me say this is
Now with regard to Shravakas or particular Buddhas, that is hearers or solitary realizers, well, they have not generated this inconceivable mind of enlightenment, which is why here we're talking about this inconceivable mind of enlightenment, the mind of enlightenment that becomes the cause, or bodhicitta, which becomes the cause of our own enlightenment. Now with regard to having generated the wish to be attain liberation, that is having generated renunciation. Now with regard to bodhicitta itself, so there's a need, we want to become liberated and we want to generate bodhicitta, but now how do we go about it? What is the method for generating bodhicitta? This is what comes next. Now with regard to bodhicitta, it's important, before we can generate bodhicitta, we need to cultivate the causes. We need to apply techniques that enable us to generate bodhicitta in our mental continuum. And so there are two techniques. That help us to generate bodhicitta. The first technique that Rinpoche mentions is the technique of the 6 causes and 1 effect. And the second technique is the technique of equalizing and exchanging self with others. Now with these two, in order to, practicing those two, this is for the sake of bodhicitta, but also to generate compassion for other sentient beings. So to understand their sufferings within the lower realms, to understand their sufferings within samsara in general, and to generate the wish to free them from that suffering, not to be able to bear their suffering, and to generate compassion, generate great compassion for all sentient beings. So this is what we need to generate. That's the kind of mind we need to generate. We need to familiarize with this attitude, and the way to do so is either through the 6 causes and 1 effect, which means understanding that all sentient beings have been our mother, recognizing that all sentient beings have been our mother, understanding the kindness they have shown us, and so forth, or by way of equalizing and exchanging self with others. And through those 2 techniques, if we apply those 2 techniques, we can then eventually generate great compassion and from there generate bodhicitta.
아니 이게 뭐줄지 이게 뭔지 되는 service 줄지 시들이 시들이 맞아.
Now, verse 7 then describes this method of generating bodhicitta as it says in the first lines, constantly swept away by the current of the four powerful rivers. Now, this is something we should consider with regard to sentient beings, that sentient beings they're constantly swept away by the current of the four powerful rivers, with these four referring to the suffering of birth, aging, sickness, and death. So sentient beings are again and again swept away by those four types of suffering. And they're bound by the tight fetters of karma, which is difficult to undo. So here, karma is what ties them. Not only are they swept away by the four powerful rivers, but they're also tied by karma. And they're trapped inside the iron net of self-grasping. Now here, self-grasping as in like holding on to a self, the misperception of the self of the person, misperception of the self of phenomena other than person. And also like completely enshrouded in the gloomy darkness of ignorance. So these last two lines basically referring to self-grasping with regard to the person and to phenomena. And then it goes on to say in verse 8, reborn over and over in boundless cycle existence, endlessly tormented by the three types of suffering, which means that these sentient beings who are like our mothers, they are born again and again in samsara, in infinite cycle existence, being tormented by the three types of suffering, which are the suffering of suffering, the suffering of change, and pervasive conditioned suffering. So having reflected upon this again and again, first we generate compassion, we generate great compassion for all sentient beings, wanting them to be free from these different states as just described. And that thereafter gives rise to bodhicitta, the mind of enlightenment, wanting to become enlightened to benefit other sentient beings and liberate them in that way. So verse 7, it is explained that verse 7 can be a method meditating on verse 7 can be a method for generating renunciation if it's applied to oneself. If we think about these different sufferings as they're described, all these different problems that we experience in samsara, if we apply it to ourselves, we generate renunciation. If we apply it to other sentient beings, we generate compassion and bodhicitta. Then verse 9, so previously Rinpoche explained that the previous verses, they describe the methods for generating bodhicitta. But then verse 9 talks about the importance of also realizing emptiness. Now verse 9, Rinpoche read verse 9, without the wisdom realizing reality, even if one gains familiarity with renunciation and the mind of enlightenment, one will not be able to cut the root of cyclic existence. Exert yourself, therefore, to realize dependent arising. Now Rinpoche explained that these words, they're saying that they're explaining that even though we have renunciation in the mind of enlightenment, even though we generate those in our continuum, without understanding what is here described as reality. So neluk in Tibetan, which means basically a mode of abidance of phenomena or reality, without realizing that, we will not be able to acquire that, we will not be able to attain liberation, we will not be able to free ourselves from samsara. Here, reality, or the mode of existence of phenomena, refers to the lack of inherent existence, refers to the absence or emptiness of inherent existence. This is what we need to realize. We need to cultivate the wisdom realizing emptiness, which then is able to overcome, is able to eliminate samsara, which is able to help us to cut through samsara. Which means basically that it's the root wisdom which keeps us in samsara. That's what we need to eliminate. We eliminate the root wisdom, and in that way we eliminate samsara. And this root wisdom, which is the mind that grasps at inherent existence, or that is the mind that grasps at itself, that can only be eliminated by another awareness, the object of which is the opposite of the object of ignorance. So unless they are directly opposite, the mind that realizes emptiness and ignorance, unless their objects are direct opposites, we cannot overcome samsara, which is why it's important to realize emptiness. Now with regard to emptiness, when we use the word empty, we use the word empty like this house is empty, this cup is empty, but this is not what this means. Here emptiness does not refer to just a place or an object being empty, but rather it means emptiness or the lack of inherent existence. So that needs to be understood. We need to understand that it actually refers to the lack of inherent existence of phenomena, which means that phenomena exist in dependence on causes and conditions. If they were to exist inherently, if they were to exist intrinsically, they would not depend on causes and conditions. They would not depend on parts, other than they would not depend on their parts. So that's basically the meaning of inherent existence. So phenomena do not exist in such a way. And it's important to not misunderstand that emptiness does not refer to nothingness. It doesn't mean that phenomena do not exist at all, but it refers to the emptiness of inherent existence. And this would also be if we were to misunderstand and to think that emptiness refers to total nothingness, well, that would stand in contradiction to our experience, our own experience of phenomena in terms of their being existent. Now, with regard to the different Buddhist tenets, or the different philosophical tenet schools in Buddhism, and of those you have the middle way, autonomists, or as they're also described as Madhyamika Svatantrika. So these philosophers, they say that all phenomena exist by way of their own characteristic. They say phenomena exist inherently, they exist by way of their own characteristic or characteristics. Now, another school that is even higher than the Madhyamika Svatantrika are the Madhyamika Prasangika, or the middle way consequentialists. They say that nothing exists inherently, that nothing exists by way of its own characteristics. So there's this debate, basically. Rinpoche described this debate that happens, so that takes place between those two philosophers, these two groups of philosophers, as described in Nagarjuna's Fundamental Wisdom and in commentary on that by Lama Tsongkhapa, with the followers of the Prasangika, Madhyamika Svatantrika. They would say if phenomena do not exist by way of their own characteristics, if they don't exist inherently, well then you couldn't have Buddha, you couldn't have the three jewels, Nirvana wouldn't make sense, and samsara wouldn't make sense. None of those objects could actually exist. While the Prasangika, the Madhyamika Prasangika followers, the followers of this particular school, they would say, well actually, unless they exist, lack inherent existence, unless they lack existence from their own side, or inherent existence by way of their own characteristic, nothing would be possible. So there's this debate taking place between those two philosophical schools. Now here we're following the system of the Madhyamika Prasangika school, who say that nothing exists from its own side, nothing exists by way of its own characteristics. So all phenomena lack inherent existence, which doesn't mean that phenomena are totally non-existent. That should not be misunderstood, but rather that they exist in dependence on other factors, that they exist in dependence on causes and conditions, they depend on their basis of imputation, and they depend on parts. Which means basically, therefore, well, for instance, Nagarjuna says in his Fundamental Wisdom, he says there's not any phenomenon that is not dependently arisen, therefore there's not any phenomenon that is not empty. So those lines are saying that phenomena do exist, but only in dependence on others, on other phenomena. So they depend on something other than themselves. And the opposite of that would be inherent existence. The opposite of existing in dependence on other phenomena would be independent existence, or existence by way of its intrinsic or inherent existence, existence by way of its own character. Now this needs to be understood here, this needs to be realized that phenomena do not exist in such a way, which takes us to emptiness. Emptiness or selflessness, well, it's twofold. You have emptiness of phenomena and you have emptiness of person. So those are the two types of emptiness. And understanding that the self that is inherent existence does not exist. We do so in dependence on different reasoning. So there are different kind of logical reasons that enable us to understand that phenomena cannot exist in such a way. So Rinpoche cited like some of these reasonings of being one and different, being lacking the lack of being one or being different, the reasoning of dependent arising, and so forth. So those are all the different reasonings that help us to understand that our grasping at a self, that holding on to a self, is a mistaken type of awareness. It's a mistaken type of mind, the object of which does not exist. So this is the understanding. We generate independence on these different reasonings.
제시도 가는데 유럽은 지금 사교생고 받는 사진고 토해가 어다들 얘기에 유럽은 지금 산나타네 산다듯이 야들이 자기 말을 쉬세야 돼 지금 이제 로컬로가 나타나게 하나 제대로 사진이 그만 또야 말이 스타디에
So Rinpoche explained the previous explanation. Rinpoche explained verse 10. Now Rinpoche explains verse 11, where basically in this verse it says that if you consider emptiness and dependent arising as being incompatible, then you cannot realize the intent of the Muni. So Rinpoche explains that, for instance, the fact that independence on causes and conditions, you can only become a Buddha independence on causes and conditions. So that understanding versus the fact that phenomena lack inherent existence. If you see that as contradictory, if you see that as incompatible, on one hand, dependence on causes and conditions, on the other hand, the lack of inherent existence, then you don't fully realize the intent of the Muni, that is, you don't realize the intent of the Buddha. Then Rinpoche explains verse 12. So when these two understandings arise not in alternation but together, merely seeing the infallibility of dependent arising destroys all modes of grasping at the object through certainty. At that time the analysis of the Buddha is complete. So Rinpoche explained that the meaning of these verses are, this verse is that once you understand that phenomena lack inherent existence, but at the same time you understand that a result depends on its cause, so the infallibility of dependent arising in the sense of dependence on causes and conditions, if both of those make sense to you, that you are able to take to mind both, and there's no disparity between those two ideas of emptiness on one hand, on the other hand, of dependent arising, when you understand that phenomena, although they lack inherent existence, nonetheless depend on causes and conditions, well then you've completed the analysis of the need. So then verse 13, furthermore appearances dispel the extreme of existence, and so forth, and which you didn't read the whole thing. Here what it's saying is that appearances, they dispel. So Rinpoche explains this to mean that in terms of the appearance, so phenomena appear to exist one way, but they actually exist in a different way. Now, this understanding of phenomena being independently arisen, if we think about this, if we reflect upon that, now then that sense of appearances dispels the extreme of existence or reification, the extreme of reification in the sense of inherent existence. While on the other hand, emptiness dispels the extreme of non-existence. So the sense that, here our understanding of emptiness, therefore once we have that understanding, then that can overcome our wrong perception of non-existence, of not existence, of phenomena not existing at all. And so once one understands how emptiness arises in the form of cause and effect, then one is no longer captivated by the view that grasps that extreme. So Rinpoche says that's basically verse number 13, the meaning of that. Then with regard to verse 14, now what this is saying that in this place we're in right now, it's important that we start meditating. We meditate on the meaning of emptiness. We meditate on the meaning of these different principles. So for instance, if we're here in Dharamsala, just recently His Holiness gave the teachings on supplement to the middle way, Buddha Balita. So if you were here at that time, it would have been good if you're taking the teachings, and even if you weren't present, at the time when those teachings were given, you can listen to recordings of those teachings to become familiar with them. And initially it will be difficult to understand. These ideas that are presented in those teachings will be difficult, but as you continue to familiarize with them, they'll get easier. So you'll get a better understanding of these different concepts as explained in those texts. And once they become easier, you start meditating on them. You should meditate on those ideas, on those concepts, in order to then move closer towards overcoming samsara and move closer towards liberation. Now, verse 14 therefore reads, "My child, once you have realized the key points of the three principal aspects of the path, seek solitude, and by generating the power of perseverance, swiftly accomplish the final aim." Now here, what this text says is that once you have thought about these principal aspects, so basically you should think about them, you should get to know them, think about them, apply reasoning until you have an understanding. You understand what they're all about. What are those three principal aspects, renunciation, bodhichitta, and the correct view? And generate an aspiration to practice them, a wish to generate them in your own continuum. And to be able to do so, you need to meditate, you need to familiarize your own mind with these different aspects. To do so, to meditate on these aspects, it is good here, it says, to seek solitude. Now, seeking solitude, Rinpoche explains there are two types of solitude. There is physical solitude and there's mental solitude, in the sense like your body being in a state of solitude and your mind being in a state of solitude that is free from disruptive thoughts. Now Rinpoche explained those two types. If we talk about physical solitude, it basically means you go to a place where there's no one else, or maybe somewhere in like an isolated place where you don't have to engage in different activities, have to do a lot of work, etc. You're like totally on your own. That would be a physical kind of state of isolation or solitude, a state of solitude. But then there's also the mental solitude. And Rinpoche gave the example, you may be up in the mountain, there may be someone meditating high up on the mountain, totally in like physical solitude without anyone around, but thinking, oh, if I'm up here as a meditator, maybe people will think I'm this precious meditator and be really impressed by me. So that is the kind of mental, in this case, you're lacking mental solitude, or the absence, the solitude from being kind of absent, which is like an absence of disruptive thoughts. Or you may think, oh, I hope that someone will bring me some food and drink, etc. So having these disruptive thoughts, if you have those kind of thoughts, you're not experiencing mental solitude, which is why Rinpoche says of the two, physical and mental solitude is the principal type of solitude. And then the last line, this last line explains who taught this text. So it says that this was taught by the learned and fully ordained monk, Lama Tsongkhapa, to Tsapo Tsongkhapa. Now here it's saying that Lama Tsongkhapa, he taught this to one of his disciples who he felt close to. So Tsapo Tsongkhapa, he taught this text to this particular passage. So it was taught by Lama Tsongkhapa to one of his disciples. Now, with regard to this text, therefore, this was the three principal aspects. Rinpoche taught this text here, and we've completed this text. And this is only a very short text. It's not very long, but it's extremely meaningful. It contains the entire Lam Rim, for instance. So when you take the Lam Rim teachings, the great Lam Rim, it's a huge volume. But the essence of what is in the Lam Rim Chemo is in this text, is found in this text. So what you find in the Lam Rim is it's a shorter version of this text. It's a shorter version of the Lam Rim text, which is why it's good to read this text, it's good to memorize it. So Tibetans would memorize it, for instance, in their own language, they would memorize it in Tibetan, but you could memorize it in your respective language. And then get an understanding of what the text is all about, ask others, check with others what is the meaning of these particular words and so forth. And of course, which is that it's difficult for us to always carry a text around, so it'd be hard to always carry the text, but once we've memorized it, it gives us the opportunity to think about this, to reflect upon this, and to gain a good understanding, a good familiarity with this particular text. And then you should think about these words, you should reflect upon these words and meditate on them. So reflect on them, meditate on them. So for instance, when you're about to sleep, at the time of lying down to sleep, at that time, reflect upon the words of the text, reflect upon the meaning of the text. And as you reflect, if you reflect and meditate on these words and you fall asleep, this will expand your sleep. It will kind of increase your sleep, or as in like expand, enhance your sleep. And so we should think about those at times when we take a break, for instance, so usually when we're working, so when we put aside our work to take a break, again to think about these words, or to think about those words, or think about this text while we're eating or while we're driving the car. So if we take all these opportunities and at times think about this, this will be beneficial. So when we talk about meditating, practicing the Dharma or meditating, we don't have to sit upright in the meditative posture and so forth. We don't necessarily have to do that. And Rinpoche says he usually jokes with his friends. He says like in the summer when you take a vacation, when you go for a picnic, you go somewhere to enjoy yourself, this would be a good time to reflect upon the Dharma. It would be beneficial in that kind of relaxed state or in that relaxed situation to meditate or to contemplate on the Dharma. So this would be a time to actually, practice the Dharma. So if you can't memorize the text, you could record it. You could make a recording and listen to the recording and then think about the words. So basically, so Rinpoche said, like, so this completes the last line, so swiftly accomplish the final aim, and so therefore Rinpoche says that he's now completed this text, he's completed this, but it's not through his own experience that he shared this with you, but rather he received a lot of Rinpoche, received a lot of explanations on this text, and he's more like a tape recorder, a faulty type of tape recorder that because of advanced age doesn't work properly any longer. And so this completes Rinpoche's teachings. So Rinpoche says actually memorize this text, but because there are a lot of people now kind of being in the presence of a lot of people, he's forgotten. So you should basically take this to heart, practice this, and Rinpoche would like to thank you for paying attention to his teaching. And so having gotten together here and Rinpoche having explained this text, so whatever virtue we have accumulated together here, let's dedicate this virtue towards the benefit of all sentient beings, so to think that all sentient beings are able to generate the three principal aspects in their own continuum, and that without exception, all sentient beings attain the state of liberation as well as enlightenment. Yes. So visualize basically that Lama Tsongkhapa is in front of you, so you supplicate Lama Tsongkhapa and say like, you've taught this text to me, and so I have received this teaching, I haven't understood everything, but I've thought about the meaning of it, and I will practice this to the best of my ability, so please pray for me that I'll be able to practice this and able to cultivate these qualities. And so think that Lama Tsongkhapa says, okay, I'll do that. So this completes these teachings today.